And when the truth finally surfaces, it often leaves behind more questions than answers. Echoes of moments that once seemed ordinary, now heavy with meaning. Remembering these stories isn't about fear. It's about awareness, empathy, and the responsibility we share to look out for one another. Sometimes the smallest intuition, the faintest sign that something isn't right, can be the difference between silence and help. So as you move through your own routines, carry that awareness with you. Stay curious, stay compassionate, and never ignore the quiet voice that urges you to pay closer attention. Because in the end, awareness isn't just protection. It's a way of honoring the lives and stories that should never be forgotten. In the days that followed, the familiar rhythms of the town felt different, quieter, heavier, as though time itself had slowed to make space for grief. Hallways that once carried laughter now carried whispers. Faces that once passed without a second thought were searched for meaning, for memory, for some sign that might explain the unexplainable. Loss has a way of changing not only how we remember the past, but how we step into the future. For those who knew her, remembrance became an act of preservation. Stories were shared in fragments, small kindnesses, shared jokes, moments of courage that might have otherwise faded with time. In holding on to these memories, the community tried to reclaim something that violence attempted to erase: the fullness of a life, not just the tragedy of its ending. And perhaps that is where the true weight of stories like this resides, not only in what was taken, but in what remains. The reminder to speak gently, to listen closely, to value the ordinary days we so often overlook. Because sometimes the most powerful tribute is not found in grand gestures, but in the quiet decision to live with greater care, awareness, and compassion than we did the day before. Yet even in the shadow of sorrow, communities have a quiet way of searching for light. Conversations that once stayed on the surface began to reach deeper places, about safety, about trust, about the unseen struggles people carry. In remembering what was lost, people also found reasons to care more fiercely for what remained. Small gestures of kindness grew more meaningful, and ordinary connections took on a new sense of urgency. Time, as it always does, continued forward. Seasons changed, new students filled the hallways, and daily routines slowly returned. But beneath that movement was a lasting imprint, a reminder woven into the identity of the place itself. Tragedy had altered the landscape in ways that could not be measured, shaping how stories would be told for years to come. And perhaps that is the quiet legacy left behind, not only grief, but awareness. A call to notice one another more closely, to protect the fragile beauty of ordinary life, and to remember that every familiar face carries a story still unfolding. Because while some chapters end too soon, the meaning we draw from them can guide how the rest are written. That sense of incompleteness is something many families come to know intimately. Justice can confirm what happened, name responsibility, and offer a measure of accountability, but it cannot return laughter to an empty room or restore the future that was taken. The legal ending of a case is not the emotional ending of grief. Instead, it becomes another quiet milestone along a much longer road of remembrance. Still, truth carries its own kind of weight and meaning. Knowing, rather than wondering, allows space for mourning to take a clearer shape. It replaces unanswered questions with certainty, however painful that certainty may be. In that clarity, some families find the first fragile steps toward peace, not because the loss is smaller, but because the unknown no longer overshadows every memory. And so the story settles into something more enduring than verdicts or headlines. It becomes part of a larger reflection on love, loss, and the fragile threads that hold ordinary life together. Even where justice feels incomplete, remembrance continues its quiet work, honoring what was, protecting what remains, and reminding the living to carry compassion forward into the days still to come. In doing so, they reshaped the narrative from one of loss alone to one of remembrance and meaning. Each shared story became a quiet act of defiance against forgetting, a way of ensuring that her life would be measured not by its final moments, but by the warmth and light she brought to others. Memory, in this sense, became something living, carried forward in conversations, in traditions, in the simple choice to speak her name with love rather than sorrow. For those outside the family, these reflections offered something important as well, a reminder that behind every headline is a human life filled with ordinary beauty. Dreams half-written, plans still forming, laughter that once echoed in familiar rooms. When people pause to see that fullness, empathy replaces distance, and tragedy becomes more than a story, it becomes a call to care more deeply for the lives around us. And perhaps that is where healing quietly begins. not in forgetting what happened, but in choosing what will endure. In kindness repeated, in compassion extended, in the steady promise that a life remembered with love can continue to shape the world long after it is gone. Through all of it, love remains the quiet constant. It shows up in the way families continue to speak her name, in the traditions they keep, and in the small moments when memory feels closer than absence. Grief may reshape daily life, but it also reveals the depth of connection that existed long before loss arrived. In that way, sorrow and love become intertwined, painful, yes, but also deeply human. Over time, healing rarely means moving on. More often, it means moving forward while carrying the past with care. The sharp edges of grief may soften, but the meaning of the life remembered grows stronger, settling into something steady and enduring. What was once overwhelming becomes part of a larger story, one defined not only by tragedy, but by resilience, remembrance, and the quiet strength required to keep going. And in that continued journey, there is a gentle reminder for everyone listening, to cherish the ordinary days, to speak kindness freely, and to hold close the people who make life feel whole. Because while loss changes us, love is what allows us to endure, and, in time, to find light again even after the darkest moments. Yet within that distance, remembrance takes on a deeper meaning. Time may carry the world forward, but for grieving families it also becomes a way of honoring what endures. They learn to mark those difficult dates not only with sorrow, but with reflection, lighting candles, sharing stories, holding on to the small details that refuse to fade. In these quiet rituals, love continues to speak, even in the absence of the voice they long to hear. For outsiders, such moments can be difficult to fully understand. The passage of years suggests closure, but grief rarely follows the expectations of the calendar. Instead, it settles into everyday life, appearing in sudden memories or gentle reminders that the bond remains unbroken. What changes is not the love itself, but the way it is carried, less visible perhaps, yet just as profound. And so the story does not truly end where public attention fades. It continues in private spaces, in whispered prayers, in the steady resilience of those who keep remembering. Because while headlines disappear and time moves forward, the meaning of a life loved deeply is never measured by how long the world looks on, but by how faithfully that memory is held. Accepting that truth forces communities and individuals alike to look more closely at the spaces they once moved through without question. It asks difficult things, honest conversations, clearer boundaries, and the courage to listen when something feels wrong even if no clear evidence exists. These are not easy changes, but they are often the quiet safeguards that grow from tragedy's aftermath. At the same time, awareness must remain balanced with compassion. To see the potential for harm in the world is not to abandon trust entirely, but to shape it more carefully. Healthy communities are built not only on vigilance, but on communication, accountability, and the willingness to protect the vulnerable without surrendering hope. Fear isolates, but understanding can unite. Perhaps the most lasting lesson is this delicate balance between openness and caution. To live fully requires trust, yet to live wisely requires attention. Holding both truths at once is difficult, but it is also where resilience is formed, where people learn to move forward not untouched by darkness, but strengthened by the determination to create safer, kinder spaces in its wake. In that search for meaning, grief is slowly transformed into purpose. What begins as pain can become a quiet determination to protect others, to ensure that lessons learned through loss are not forgotten. Advocacy meetings, school discussions, and support groups may seem like small steps, yet together they form a promise that remembrance will lead to action rather than silence. For many families, this shift does not lessen the sorrow, but it offers direction. It allows love to take on a new form, one that reaches beyond personal memory into the wider world. By speaking openly, by encouraging awareness, they help create spaces where future harm might be prevented and where those suffering feel less alone. And perhaps that is where the deepest resilience is found. Not in erasing what happened, but in choosing what grows from it. When compassion becomes guidance and memory becomes protection, tragedy leaves behind more than grief. It leaves behind the possibility of change, carried forward by people determined to turn loss into something that keeps others safe. That endurance often comes from people who refuse to let silence become the final word, investigators who keep revisiting overlooked details, advocates who continue asking difficult questions, and families who hold on to truth even when hope feels distant. Their persistence is rarely visible in headlines, yet it is the quiet force that moves a case forward when momentum fades. In this way, Justice becomes something measured in patience and resolve rather than immediate resolution. It unfolds slowly, shaped by long hours, careful listening, and the willingness to follow evidence wherever it leads. Though the process can be exhausting, each small step carries meaning, affirming that truth is worth the effort required to uncover it. And when answers finally emerge, they do more than close a chapter. They restore a sense of dignity to the life that was lost. While no outcome can undo the pain, the acknowledgement of truth offers a form of steadiness, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, persistence can still bring light. In that act of remembrance, storytelling becomes something gentle rather than intrusive, a way of keeping presence alive where absence might otherwise settle in. Each retelling, when done with care, centers not on fear or spectacle, but on dignity, compassion, and the simple truth that a life mattered deeply. For listeners, this shift changes how such stories are carried forward. Instead of curiosity alone, there is reflection. Instead of distance, there is empathy. Remembering in this way invites people to see beyond the moment of tragedy and to recognize the fullness of a person's life, the relationships, hopes, and quiet joys that existed long before loss. And perhaps that is the most meaningful legacy remembrance can offer. Not just memory, but responsibility. To speak with kindness, to value the ordinary days we share, and to ensure that when a life is taken, the love surrounding it continues to be seen and felt. Because in choosing to remember with humanity, we allow light to endure where darkness once tried to remain. When stories are approached with that sense of care, they become more than narratives of what went wrong. They become quiet guides for what can be made safer. Listeners begin to notice patterns, to trust their instincts, to recognize that small concerns are worth voicing. Awareness, in this way, is not heavy with fear, but steady with intention. It offers the possibility that understanding today might prevent sorrow tomorrow. At the same time, compassion must remain at the center of every retelling. Behind each lesson is a real person whose life held meaning far beyond the tragedy attached to their name. Honoring that truth keeps remembrance grounded in dignity rather than spectacle, ensuring that empathy grows alongside knowledge. And perhaps that is the most responsible way to carry stories like this forward, gently, thoughtfully, and with purpose. Not to dwell in darkness, but to let even the hardest histories become a source of protection, kindness, and deeper human connection for those who continue walking in the light. That fragility is often what stays with people long after the details fade. The realization that life can shift without warning encourages a quieter kind of awareness, one rooted not in fear, but in appreciation. Ordinary evenings, routine conversations, and familiar goodbyes begin to carry deeper meaning when we understand how easily they can become memories. For many, this awareness changes how they move through the world. Moments once overlooked are held a little longer. Words of care are spoken more freely. The everyday becomes something gently sacred, not because tragedy is expected, but because its possibility reminds us of what truly matters. And in that understanding, the story leaves behind something more enduring than sorrow. It offers a call to live attentively, to value connection, and to treat time as the quiet gift it is. Because while certainty may be fragile, compassion and remembrance are choices that can remain steady, guiding how we honor the past and how we care for one another in the days still unfolding. That quiet endurance is often the truest measure of a life's impact. Not the headlines that briefly carry a name, but the steady imprint left on hearts, habits, and hopes. In shared stories, in acts of kindness inspired by memory, in the simple decision to keep loving despite pain, presence continues in ways that cannot be taken away. What was once immediate becomes enduring, woven gently into the fabric of everyday living. Over time, remembrance softens the sharpest edges of sorrow. It does not erase absence, but it allows warmth to exist beside it. Laughter returns in small, unexpected moments. Gratitude begins to sit where only grief once lived. And in those subtle shifts, healing reveals itself not as an ending, but as a quiet continuation of love in a different form. Perhaps that is where the deepest meaning rests. That a life, even when brief, can echo far beyond its years, shaping compassion, strengthening connection, and reminding others to hold one another a little closer. In this way, nothing meaningful is truly lost. It is carried forward, gently and faithfully, by those who remember. In the end, remembrance becomes a quiet promise carried forward by everyone who hears her name. A promise to notice the overlooked, to listen more closely, and to meet ordinary moments with greater care. Though the story holds sorrow, it also holds intention, the belief that awareness and compassion can grow even from the darkest chapters. What lingers is not only the loss, but the call to live differently because of it. To choose kindness sooner, to protect the vulnerable more fiercely, and to value the fragile gift of time while it is still ours to hold. These choices, small as they may seem, are how echoes turn into change. And perhaps that is where her story truly rests, not in the place where it ended, but in the lives that continue to move forward with deeper understanding. In every act of care, every moment of attention, and every memory spoken with love, something gentle endures.